everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests. I'm incredibly delighted to be welcoming all of you here today to our session on shaping a fair digital future. Now, if anyone's ever in doubt, by now it's abundantly clear that the progress of artificial intelligence has really shifted from incremental to exponential. Now, according to the Stanford Human AI Index, over 78% of global organizations use AI. But we find that there's some significant evidence that governance is still lagging. As the scale of automated decisions expands, the stakes are rising as well. And so is as well public concerns. Nearly 60% of people worldwide say they don't fully trust AI systems, despite expecting them to improve their lives. And we're seeing governments really responding. So the EU has now passed the world's first AI Act in 2024, while the US, Japan, and others are advancing new frameworks. There are also some multilateral efforts going on with the G7, the OECD, where we're really pushing for interoperable, values-based governance. But the question is, of course, not just who regulates, but rather it's how do we build the systems of shared responsibilities between governments, industry, and civil society. Now, it's clear that the UAE has emerged as a global adoption leader in the space. In 2024, it introduced a national AI governance policy, it launched regulatory AI sandboxes, and it published a 12 principles ethics charter to guide the safe and transparent development. The UAE also recently made the news through its announcement that it will implement AIs in the formulations of its regulations. So in today's session, we'll explore, we'll expand, and we'll confront the session really about how we govern emerging technologies in ways that are fair, inclusive, and globally aligned. And for this, I'm incredibly honored to be joined today, first of all, by Mark Rothenberg, who's the Executive Director and founder of the Center for AI and Digital Policy, Gabriele Mazzini, who's the architect and the lead author of the EU AI Act, as well as a fellow at the MIT, as well as Mohamed Abouissa, who is the Director and Head of Solutions Engineering at Cisco. Thank you so much for joining me. So, I would like to just start this conversation and really frame it around almost like a fact-finding mission where we really try and tease out the opportunities that this session here offers us. So let's just get started very simply with one sentence, starting with Mohamed.
Okay.
What do you think is currently the most pressing challenge that technology providers face in really building public trust in AI?
Sure. So thank you, Walter. First of all, I'm glad to be here in the capital of the UAE. By the way, I live in Abu Dhabi, so I have the privilege not to have the jet lag. So to answer your question, I guess the biggest challenge we see as technology providers today is how we can embed a trust in the systems. So through like transparent infrastructure, through secure data flows, and through accountable AI systems. So we don't think about, trust as assumption, part of the model, but we make sure that it's, proven in every single time that we use AI. So this, I believe, the biggest challenge that we see as providers.
Brilliant. And Gabriele, having really been at the forefront of one of the flagship global AI regulations, what do you think is sort of still the most urgent, let's say, governance dilemma that regulators are grappling with right now in your view?
So first of all, thanks on my side as well for the invitation. Very, very glad to be here. I think there is still, I think, what I sense since leaving the Commission and traveling quite a bit around, I still sense that the main point is this tension between regulation versus innovation, which actually I believe is not really a tension, and I think we can perhaps discuss this more. And so I think this is the main governance dilemma that I think I keep hearing. But I would say that actually, if you want to move forward that, and thinking more the next 10, 15 years, I think when I think about AI, the main dilemmas I would see going forward are things around AI dependency, around impact on the workforce. These are things that maybe today we don't always think about, but in the future, I think we should think about this more.
Brilliant. And Mark, similar question to you. What do you think is sort of one of the main challenges in AI governance in the field at the moment?
Well, it's a great question, Walter, and also let me thank the hosts for the opportunity to be here at the Center for AI and Digital Policy we study national AI strategies around the world, it's key looking at these strategies that to establish human-centric and trustworthy AI is a central challenge. But I would actually pick up on phrases that His Excellency, the Attorney General, used in his remarks earlier this morning. He talked about transparency and accountability. These are the hard problems in AI governance. Transparency, particularly for probabilistic systems where we can't prove or replicate outcomes, and accountability for systems that we don't fully understand and don't yet have the metrics to evaluate. I think this is critical to pursue human-centric and trustworthy AI.
Brilliant. So I've taken some notes on some of the challenges that you all have mentioned, and we have here, on some level, there's public trust. On some level, there's still that balance between innovation and regulation, but also, Mark, what you just mentioned, really the issue still of accountability and transparency, as well as the Attorney General earlier remarked. So the question is now, as we go into the next section, looking at the trends in AI governance. And Mark, I'm familiar with your work with the AI and Democratic Values Index that you have just published. What do you see are sort of the trends globally right now? What are sort of some of the initiatives that are taking place to address those challenges that we just discussed?
Well, let me say this is a rapidly moving field, not only in terms of technology, but also in terms of governance. I've worked with many of the international organizations, the OECD, UNESCO, and Council of Europe, the EU, which over the last several years have put in place important governance frameworks for artificial intelligence. Now, you ask about trends, and this is a key question because when we started this work, maybe a decade ago, the focus was on the fairness of decision-making, the accuracy, the transparency of automated decision-making, an issue that I imagine is familiar to many people. But over time, we saw new issues emerge. Sustainability, the impact of AI systems and the development of data centers on energy consumption, gender equity and inclusion, issues that were raised by the work of UNESCO. So I think over time we're seeing both a deeper understanding of the challenges for AI governance and also a broader appreciation of the range of social issues we need to consider.
Interesting. Is there anything maybe of the countries that you look at that has been surprising, maybe any outliers that work on some initiatives that you're like, oh, these are really falling out of the mainstream, but that are still maybe ones to watch?
Yes, well, I've been impressed doing the comparative work on all the developments that are taking place in many regions of the world. And when we use the phrase democratic values, we use it in the sense of public participation, openness, and transparency. Organizing a conference like this, for example, and having an opportunity to discuss a national AI strategy, I think is a very important step forward to help build public trust. Because you want the public to understand the ambitions, the goals, and even to recognize some of the challenges. And we see this all around the world.
Brilliant. So Gabriele, I would like to take some of these insights that Mark shared and bring them over to you. And I think one of the benefits of having you here, of course, is that you've worked on the EU AI Act. And I think that I remember when it was about to be released, all the sort of like information that it was about to be shared. And one of the hopes I remember from some of the commissioners was that perhaps it could almost stand as, let's say, a North Star for global AI regulation, so that countries could have, countries would be shaped by that in the name of AI safety, the Brussels effect, basically. 1 year on, what do you think is the impact of the EU AI Act, both inside the European Union and also outside? Is it actually becoming a global benchmark?
I think there is a strong demand for understanding the AI Act, first of all. So I think this is what I realize when I travel, both within Europe and outside Europe, that the AI Act turned out to be a rather complex piece of legislation. And so I think both industry, governments are still grappling with it. And so I see there is definitely a lot of interest. I would say the AI Act is a bit of a stake in the ground. And I think it's the first time you have a comprehensive legal framework worldwide that regulates AI. And so this creates sort of an anchoring point whereby thinking about outside Europe, a lot of governments are really looking at it and trying to identify what are the strengths and the opportunities, what are the good sides or the bad sides. But indeed, I also hear a lot of demand in terms of, why did you choose to do this? Why did you choose to do that? What that specific provision is going to impact innovation or not. So coming a bit to the second part of your question, I think it's very difficult to say whether it will become a global benchmark, and we're going to see a Brussels effect of the AI Act for a variety of reasons. And I would say maybe the one that makes me think maybe it will be different this time is exactly because AI is very value-driven. The AI Act was born as an exercise of ensuring trust, and I think a lot of people today have spoken about trust, and I think this is definitely a key point. But of course, from the European perspective, I think this is very clear. It's what we call an internal market regulation. And so, but because AI is pretty much an expression also of who we are, our values, our cultures, our religions, as was mentioned before. So I think that considering that as one piece of legislation can become the benchmark across the world, in my view, it's unlikely, although some of the inspirational principles still make sense across the world.
Brilliant. And I guess, part of the challenge, especially when you say you try and put a stake on the ground, and that is, of course, even increased by the fact that artificial intelligence moves so fast. Some people ask you, why did you do this? Why did you not do this? With the technology developing, I guess these questions are kind of like brought up over and over again. What do you think are the mechanisms, or are there any mechanisms to sort of like adapt the act in some way as there's maybe new challenges that come up through technology? You mentioned earlier the future of work. How do you continue adapting a piece of legislation that is so vast?
Yeah. I think, of course, the EU was going to be constrained. We was going to be able to do. But, stepping a bit outside the EU, I would say, first of all, AI regulation is not the regulation of AI. And the regulation of AI is not AI regulation. So I think this is the first building block. In the sense that when you think about regulating AI, the best thing to do is to think about what kind of frameworks are in place in a certain context. That's why also AI regulation is very context dependent. So what does your legal order look like? What kind of tools can you leverage to actually prevent, mitigate certain risks of AI without actually regulating AI? I think that's the first step to do. And then, of course, I believe there is still space for some AI-specific regulation. But then indeed comes, if you want, at a later stage, when already you have leveraged a lot of tools that you have. And this, in my view, could ensure also more future-proofness of the exercise.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I guess one of the challenges as well that we keep hearing, I think specifically since large language models and foundation models have been so big, is obviously one about the sustainability and the environmentalism and privacy concerns as well. And some people are proposing increasingly the use of AI on the edge and across global networks. And Mohana, this is just saying, this is the next question is for you. Sure. Could you briefly provide us with an overview what this means with AI on the edge, and what does this mean for this ever-existing question of balancing innovation with accountability, particularly when we look at consumer rights data?
Sure. So at Cisco, we believe that balancing the innovation with accountability starts at the infrastructure layer. And I'm not saying this just because I represent Cisco, but we truly believe in this. So I think at Cisco, we are building in secure, observable systems that can protect the user data wherever it lives, either if it lives in the edge, or it lives in the data center or multi-cloud environment, or if it's across the global network. So I guess Dr. Kuwaiti, I believe he mentioned something like that. With Cisco today, there's not much system in the world that can go and validate the model for you and see what's happened inside those models. So in Cisco, with the AI Defense suite that we provide today, you can go and validate the model, and you provide something I think the security team knows, red teaming, that is enabled by AI and by algorithms that can go for more than 1 trillion questions to validate those models. So this is something we see that there is big opportunity in the market for having those systems that validate the AI models at scale. And second, I think with our zero trust approach, you need to make sure that the right entities access the right data at the right time. This is something very important. But to put it in short answer for the initial question, I guess we cannot sacrifice or put the innovation at the cost of the user rights. So we need to make sure that those users, they have the right trust, and we believe in Cisco that if you scale the accountability, that will be the answer for keep the innovation continue in your environments.
Interesting. So it does sound that it's almost like responsibility through innovation, and ultimately what you're framing is, the way I understand it, almost as like a competitive advantage, or the responsible AI is the competitive advantage in effect. So is that correct?
Yeah, it is. And let me give you maybe a follow-up answer to that. So in Cisco recently, we did a survey across 8,000 customers worldwide for covering more than 30 segments, I guess, from the markets.
Yeah.
And we have multiple amazing results and some key insights. So we see that 98% of the 8,000 people that we survey, and most of them are senior and leadership and CEOs, they believe that AI is important, and they believe that AI, the urgency of AI increased in the last 12 months. But at the same time, this urgency comes 50% from the CEOs, but 13% of those respondents, the 8,000, they say we are ready to deploy and adopt AI. So as you can see here, and one of the main key pillars that it's reduced from being available and being ready this year was the infrastructure and the talent. So I think those two areas maybe we can address in the follow-up questions on this, that those two areas we believe that we need to address. The government today are addressing those 2 points, from availability and from being ready for AI and the future of AI.
Wonderful. And just to bring this kind of to Gabriele now, because I'm really glad I have someone from the private sector as well as someone who used to work in government. Gabriele, in your view, now that we hear sort of the initiatives that are happening, some from the private sectors we've heard today, some from the public sector, and we put them all in the same mix with the challenges, is government legislation the best way to govern AI?
I would say that government has always had a role.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the nature of our society. We need government. But at the same time, the law is a tool.
Yeah.
Right? So regulating doesn't mean necessarily killing innovation. So that's the point. Depending how to use that tool. You can use a tool as His Excellency was mentioning this morning, for instance, to foster transparency. So if you want to regulate outcomes, and that makes sense, in certain situations when you know something is not working, or you want to shape certain outcomes in a certain way because you have the evidence that something is not working, it may make sense to have a constraining regulation. So a regulation that says, well, you have to do this, this, and this, and in this way. But if you maybe don't know exactly, maybe sort of an evidence-seeking type of regulation, meaning essentially you foster transparency to gather evidence, and then perhaps later to constrain more. So I think really the tool has this, the law has this advantage. It's really a great tool that can be used in many different ways. And of course, co-regulation is also one additional option that we have. In a sense, the AI Act is in part also a co-regulatory tool because it relies on the law, but also on the standards to supplement the law.
Could you expand on what do you mean exactly with co-regulation, just so that, there's various approaches that I've come across, but just so it's clear for...
Yeah, co-regulation means essentially trying to set norms in a concerted way, in a certain fashion, in the sense that it's not just the government top-down setting all the rules, but maybe the government setting certain principles, and then having industry develop best practices aligning to those principles. So it could be best practices, it could be standards, it could be voluntary commitments. And of course, when it comes to AI, standards, in my view, play a big role. So standards is always a voluntary tool, whether it's done at EU level or international level like ISO or IEEE. These are, you can just have standards where companies align to this without being bound to do that. Or you can create a legal framework that somehow gives those standards a bit of a different standing.
Brilliant. Mark, I would like to sort of shift the discussion now a little bit towards, let's call it also almost like the governance opportunities, if we want. So there's a lot of frameworks that are emerging, a lot of standards, some regulations and acts, some bigger and more sort of ready than others. But of course, we're still facing some blind spots in AI governance, particularly as the technology evolves. What are sort of some of the key factors that you consider when evaluating a country's AI policies and practices? So if we think of it backwards, what does a good policy environment for a country look like, for example, based on your index?
Sure. Well, we look at national AI strategies. We ask the question, are governments committed to basic principles like fairness, accountability, transparency? Do they have independent agencies? Do they invite public participation in decision-making? Are the national strategies readily accessible to the public? In the last couple of years, we've also asked questions about support for international agreements. So, for example, the UNESCO recommendation on AI ethics, which the UAE has supported and is helping to implement. This is actually one of our metrics for success. We're asking about support for the Council of Europe AI Treaty. This is the first internationally binding legal treaty for the governance of AI. We think it's a very good framework for international cooperation on human rights. So that would also be a consideration for us. And Walter, if I may make one additional point, because we've also talked a bit about the relationship between innovation and regulation. I think it's a mistake to view these as a trade-off. I think innovation can also apply to regulation when we have good strategies that engage in data minimization and privacy-enhancing techniques. We can improve AI systems and also minimize the risk. But this comes about through a regulatory framework that identifies these goals and encourages companies and developers to pursue them through a governance framework.
Brilliant. And I guess part of the opportunity as well for different countries, different blocks if we want, to draft good governance of AI is also because if we find the right spaces, it allows us to almost go beyond the borders of a country. As we saw, Gabriele mentioned potentially the Brussels effect taking place and really shape the standards on a international, regional, perhaps sometimes even global level. If you look at the sort of trends of AI governance, what is required and what is required to meet the emerging challenges? Do you see any spots that are presently undergoverned or which are sort of some major governance opportunities for countries, for example, for the UAE or for other emerging markets?
I think generative AI, ChatGPT, and other similar large language models have certainly posed new challenges. Part of the challenge, of course, is that these services are so impressive because they produce results. The text can be very persuasive, the music, the artwork, all of this is actually quite remarkable. But the ability to interrogate it and to determine how the outputs are produced becomes a very difficult challenge. And even the innovators are saying we really need a deeper understanding of this particular technique. So I would say as we move increasingly into reliance on generative AI systems, the large language models, probabilistic models, we will need to improve our governance methods.
Fantastic. And Mohanad, if we go almost like a step lower, so instead of looking at now the tools and almost like the innovation layer, like generative AI that Mark mentioned, but if we look at really the infrastructure, really like the backbone of AI, if we want. In your view, how can we ensure that that very digital infrastructure is actually built for fairness, for transparency, and resilience, especially in emerging markets?
So I guess when we speak about fairness, we speak about equal access. If you look at the multiple countries in the global south, they don't have the privilege to that connectivity. So what we do in Cisco, and I guess one of the speakers, one of their excellencies mentioned that, we need to expand the broadband access and the 5G access for these users. At least they can leverage the AI and not only be, accessed by selected group of people. So this is number one. So when it comes to transparency, I guess we need to give the visibility for these AI models. So at least to see what's happening inside those AI models, and I think His Excellency, Faisal Banai, he mentioned that. So because we don't know what's happening inside, so you need to provide the mechanism about what's happening inside those models. And third, the last portion you mentioned, resiliency. Resiliency for us means security. So today, a lot of attacks on the surface space that I think Dr. Kuwaiti mentioned it as well, that it is AI-powered and AI-enabled. So we need to make sure that we cover those three aspects with what we see in the market. So I guess today, with what we see in Cisco, by providing the energy-efficient data center for our customer, working with them to enable even the people who power those data centers from the local resources, it is something also very important.
Yeah.
And at the end, having AI ready or AI readiness, it includes three aspects. The infrastructure should be ready. You should have the right manpower and the right equity to manage all of this. So this is how we think about the three aspects that you mentioned: the fairness, the resiliency, and the transparency.
And as we wrap up now, I would like to maybe give a few key messages as well to the audience members and the distinguished guests who are here. Like, Mohammed, starting with you, and just like, so we can keep it crisp and punchy and short, based on what you just mentioned, what do you think is truly required to move the needle as far as infrastructure and accountability is concerned? Is there one thing in particular that you're like, this is what we need?
Okay, I think we should provide everybody, the government and the private sector, we should work on building like secure AI-ready data center that can give equal access or like universal access where people share common principles, not just only impacted by the regional and the local policies. So we in Cisco believe that the future or the future for infrastructure should address three things to address your question. First, any infrastructure should be scalable, should be observable, so it can cater for accountability. So second, those infrastructure, and this is mentioned, your point at the beginning, it should be distributed at the edge. And this is for inclusivity, for everybody can have access to those AI-ready data centers. And the last one is the partnership between the private sector and the government to make sure that we have the right governance and the right framework to manage all of this. So to put it in a short sentence, I think we need to build fairness, not bolt on, but built in from the chipset up to the maybe cloud policy.
Yeah, brilliant. And Mark, final statement from you as well. What do you think is sort of a significant trend that we can expect to see in AI governance, perhaps in the next year?
Well, I think the governance models will continue to evolve. The focus right now, of course, is implementation and enforcement. It's easy, for governments to draft statements and issue declarations. The hard work is oftentimes the implementation. So that is our focus over the next several years, and we look forward to working with governments and making progress in those areas.
Brilliant. Gabriele, final statement. AI governance frameworks, as Mark just said, will they evolve? But do you expect more like a global convergence or perhaps more of a fragmentation?
I think it's very difficult to say. What I've seen just recently is that with the change in administration in the US government, just what happened in the AI Summit in Paris. First of all, there was a change from AI Safety Summit to AI Action Summit. This was actually an initiative by the French government. But then during the summit, for instance, there has been quite a contrasting position between the US position expressed by the Vice President Vance around the regulation. And actually, you could almost see a bit of a shift in the EU policy as well, in the sense that von der Leyen's speech was a lot about investment, and indeed even about cutting red tape. So I think even in Europe, there has been probably a sense that there has been a shift that needs to happen as well. So, but of course, Europe went quite far ahead with the regulation. And a lot of countries around the world are looking at that model as well. Like, for instance, in the US, there are states that are adopting legislation similar to the UAI Act, or in South America, like Brazil. None of them is complete, but, you know. So I think it's difficult to predict, but I think a lot of movements will happen.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we're out of time, but we've been delighted to be joining you here today. We'll be here for the rest of the conference, so if you have any questions, we shall be here to answer them. Please thank our speakers, and I wish you the rest of a nice conference. Thank you.
Thank you.